sky. The Wall Street Journal reporting the Iranian military installation was struck with 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs. And this is the oil tanker hit by an Iranian drone strike Monday, fire breaking out on the vessel docked in a U.S. That attack injuring 15 American soldiers, with 5 in serious condition. As the administration sends thousands of troops into the region, President Trump is sending mixed messages on the war's future, saying negotiations to end it are going well, but warning that the U.S. will be blowing up and completely obliterating Iranian energy infrastructure and drinking water plants if Iran doesn't reopen the critical Strait of Hormuz soon. Concerns growing that the threat targeting civilian infrastructure is a violation of international humanitarian law. George pressing Secretary of State Marco Rubio about Trump's words.
That's a great expansion of the objectives.
Well, I think the first point the president makes is he prefers diplomacy. As I said, those efforts are nascent. There is
UAE port, a reminder the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. Iran also sending a wave of missiles over Israel, a day after this strike on this oil refinery in the country's north. A fireball erupting from the site. And now, with a prolonged war hitting the global economy, pressure is mounting on the Trump administration as American service members
messages being relayed back and forth, some conversations going on, including through intermediaries, and he always prefers that.
But at the same time, the administration is claiming a deal with Iran could come, quote, shortly, all as Iran repeatedly insists there are no direct talks with the U.S., saying the president's 15 become targets. These new images show a U.S. radar jet destroyed by an Iranian attack. Pieces of that U.S. Air Force E-3 Sentry scattered among debris at the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. Point plan includes many, quote, requests that are excessive, unrealistic, and illogical. And overnight, the Financial Times is out with a report that a broker for
What makes this dangerous now is not just that the United States and Iran are trading blows. It is that the war is already moving beyond the familiar script of controlled escalation and into something wider, dirtier, and much harder to contain. A reported American strike on a military site in Isfahan, bunker buster bombs being used, an oil tanker burning in a UAE port after a drone hit, missiles flying over Israel, a refinery on a paracel wounded after an Iranian attack on a U.S. airbase in Saudi Arabia. That is not a clean message being sent back and forth. That is a region-wide battlefield taking shape in real time, with energy routes, allied territory, civilian infrastructure, and U.S. forces all getting pulled into the same chain of escalation. And once that starts, the headline is no longer just who hit whom. The real issue becomes whether anyone involved still has a reliable off-ramp. Right now, that is the part that looks weakest. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz is one of the clearest signs that this is bigger than a military exchange. That Joe per belp, now. If it remains effectively shut, the pain does not stay in the Gulf. It moves through shipping, insurance, fuel costs, industrial supply chains, and public inflation far from the battlefield. So even before asking who is winning tactically, the deeper question is who can absorb the strategic blowback. Iran's obvious advantage is that it does not need to defeat the United States outright to impose costs. It just needs to keep widening the price of confrontation. The American advantage is overwhelming military power. That same strength, once Washington uses it openly and repeatedly, expectations change. Allies demand protection. Rivals look for openings. And every successful strike raises the political cost of failing to control what follows. That is where the mixed messaging from President Trump becomes more than a communications problem. On one side, the administration says negotiations are moving and a communications problem. On one side, the administration says negotiations are moving and our movits it hort milt, the torp pescaubit. That matters because it exposes a contradiction at the center of the U.S. position. If diplomacy is genuinely active, language like that is not just inflammatory. It can poison the credibility of any negotiation by making the American objective look less like de-escalation and more like coercion, without limits. And if those threats are not just rhetorical, then the administration is moving into territory that raises serious legal, moral, and strategic questions all at once. Civilian infrastructure is not a casual target set. Threatening it may be intended to terrify Tehran into backing down, but it also risks doing the opposite by hardening Iranian resolve, inflaming regional opinion, and giving Tehran a stronger political case that it is resisting collective punishment rather than just absorbing military retaliation. That is one of the central dangers here. A threat can look strong in the short term and still be strategically reckless. It can project dominance while narrowing your diplomatic room and increasing the chance of a wider war. And the battlefield reality already suggests that this conflict is not staying neatly contained. The reported destruction of a U.S. E-3 Sentry aircraft at Prince Sultan Air Base, with American troops injured and some seriously wounded, is especially revealing. That is not just another incident. It shows that U.S. assets, including high-value surveillance platforms, are vulnerable. That matters because wars like this are often judged publicly by the spectacular strike footage people see online. But militarily, they are shaped by attrition, endurance. If Iran can hit American positions often enough to create visible losses, it does not need parity. It needs persistence. It needs to show that the U.S. cannot enter this fight without paying a direct human and operational cost. And once injured American service members become part of the story, domestic political pressure changes. The war stops being abstract. It becomes a question of whether the administration has a plan that matches the scale of the danger it is creating. Israel's front adds another layer. Iranian missiles over Israel a day after an oil refinery strike in the north underscore that the conflict is no longer running on one axis. There are now multiple pressure points operating at once: Gulf shipping, Israeli infrastructure, Saudi-based American assets, and the broader economic shock running underneath all of it. That creates a serious advantage for Iran in one specific sense. It can stretch the map. It can force its opponents to defend more targets, more symbols of economic stability than any one missile volley alone would suggest. But Iran's weakness is just as real. The more it pushes, the more it risks inviting exactly the sort of sustained American response that could damage core military and energy assets over time. So both sides have leverage, and both sides are also standing close to their own trap. The other pressure point here is credibility. Iran says there are no direct talks. The administration says messages are moving and a deal may come soon. Those two claims cannot both be taken at face value without qualification. At this stage, back-channel contact to intermediaries is entirely plausible. But the important point is not whether messages exist. The important point is whether there is enough common ground left to translate contact into restraint. And the public positions suggest the gap is still wide. Iran is reportedly rejecting major parts of a proposed framework as excessive, unrealistic, and illogical. That is diplomatic language, but it points to something harder underneath. Each side may still believe time and pressure improve its leverage. That belief is exactly how limited wars. Then with the report that a broker for the defense secretary allegedly explored a major investment in defense-linked assets just weeks before the strikes. Even if the investment was never completed and the allegation is flatly denied, is politically explosive because it lands in the worst possible environment. In a war, even the appearance of financial proximity to the defense industry can become corrosive. Not because it proves wrongdoing by itself, but because it feeds the suspicion that strategic decisions and private gain are drifting too close together. In a moment when troops are being deployed, bases are being hit, and global markets are already taking stress, public trust becomes its own battlefield. And once that starts eroding, even legitimate military decisions become harder to sustain. So the biggest issue now is not just whether the next strike lands in Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, or the Gulf. It is whether this war is entering the phase where every move creates a second and third consequence that nobody can fully control. Military power can break target, It cannot automatically rebuild deterrence, reopen sea lanes, calm oil markets, reassure allies, protect every exposed base, and preserve legal and political legitimacy at the same time. That is the deeper contradiction now coming into view. This may be sold as pressure designed to force a deal, but pressure without a credible boundary can just become momentum towards something much larger. The next development matters because it will tell us whether the people driving this escalation are still shaping events, or whether events are starting to shape them. Watch that quote then. Tell me where you think this is heading, because the risk now is not just more violence. It is miscalculation at a scale that redraws the region and shakes the global economy with it. Subscribe and stay locked in, because the next shift in this story may tell us whether this is still a crisis with exits or the beginning of a war that no one can fully stop.